In the sweltering heat of Carter's garage, a small-town mechanic was about to take another beating from fate. A routine afternoon turned dangerous when the iron vultures swaggered in, revving engines and wrecking everything in reach. Chuck Norris wasn't your typical customer. For years, he'd served as a military hand-to-hand instructor and undefeated martial arts champion, known for ending conflicts before they started. When the iron vultures shoved Ray Carter against his own workbench, they had no idea they were picking a fight with a man who'd turned real battlefields into training grounds. Chuck's quiet, decisive move would ignite a reckoning that would ripple far beyond the garage walls. What began as another round of bullying would become a shift in power. Mesa Flats would never forget the day Chuck Norris walked in and the iron vultures walked out broken. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Heat rippled across the cracked asphalt of Carter's garage, distorting the view of the dusty two-lane highway beyond. Inside, the familiar symphony of metal on metal rang out, wrenches tightening bolts, air compressors hissing, and the occasional clatter of a dropped tool on the concrete floor. Ray Carter moved with practiced precision, his weathered hands navigating the inner workings of a Harley-Davidson with the ease of a man who'd been doing this for 3 decades. The oscillating fan in the corner pushed hot air around rather than cooling anything, but Ray barely noticed. He was lost in the meditation of his work, the place where problems had clear solutions and machines made sense in ways people never did. He wiped sweat from his brow with his forearm, leaving a streak of grease across his temple. "You look like you're painting war stripes on yourself now," came a voice from the garage entrance. Ray looked up to see Samantha Brooks leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed and a half-smile playing on her lips. Her semi was parked outside, dwarfing everything else in the lot. "Sam, didn't expect you back through town so soon," Ray said, reaching for a rag to clean his hands. "Thought you were headed to Albuquerque for the week." Route changed. Some corporate decision-maker realized it's cheaper to go east before going west. She shrugged, stepping into the garage. "Besides, I missed your coffee. That truck stop near Flagstaff serves what tastes like burnt motor oil." Ray chuckled, heading to the small office area where a pot of coffee had been sitting since morning. "Well, mine's probably not much better at this point. Anything's better than what I've been drinking." Sam accepted the mug, leaning against the workbench. Her eyes drifted to the Harley. "That Stevenson's bike? Thought he swore off riding after his kid was born. Wife's making him sell it," Ray confirmed. "I'm just tuning it up before he lists it." "Shame, really. It's a beautiful machine." Sam nodded, sipping her coffee. "How's business otherwise?" "Steady enough." Ray's eyes didn't quite meet hers. "Some good days, some quiet ones. And the vultures? They still riding through causing trouble?" Ray's shoulders tensed slightly. "They pass through. Nothing I can't handle." Sam fixed him with a knowing look. "That's not what I heard from Ellie at the diner. Said they nearly tore the place apart last Tuesday. And you had to replace a mirror they broke the week before." Before Ray could respond, the distant rumble of motorcycles cut through the air. It started as a low vibration, building steadily into a throaty roar that made the tools on the wall tremble slightly. Ray's expression hardened as he set down his wrench. "Speak of the devils," Sam muttered. 5 motorcycles pulled into the lot, chrome gleaming under the merciless sun. The riders revved their engines unnecessarily, letting the growl echo through the garage before cutting the power. The sudden silence felt heavier than the noise. The leader swung his leg over his bike with exaggerated leisure. Vince Ironjaw Mercer stood a solid 6'3", his frame imposing even without the leather vest adorned with the Iron Vulture's insignia, steel-beaked bird with red eyes clutching a chain in its talons. His face bore the marks of someone who'd been in plenty of fights: a crooked nose, a thin scar above his right eyebrow, and the permanently clenched jaw that had earned him his nickname. The other 4 vultures followed their leader, each with varying degrees of swagger. 2 were burly and bearded, 1 was wiry with tattoos crawling up his neck, and the shortest one had a perpetual sneer that seemed plastered to his face. "Well, if it isn't Ray Ray," Vince called out, his voice carrying the artificial cheer of someone enjoying a private joke. "Just the man we were looking for." Ray set his coffee down, wiping his hands again on the already soiled rag. "Afternoon, Vince. Something I can help you with?" "Oh, we're just making our rounds." Vince sauntered into the garage as if he owned it, eyes scanning the tools and equipment with predatory interest. "Checking on our bikes, making sure they're running smooth." One of the bearded vultures snickered. "Yeah, making sure everything's running smooth in town." Vince's gaze landed on Sam, and his smile widened. "And who's this? Don't think we've had the pleasure." "The pleasure's all yours, I'm sure," Sam replied, not bothering to introduce herself. She casually slipped her phone from her pocket, keeping it in her hand. Vince's eyes narrowed slightly before he turned back to Ray. "Business good, Ray? Ray? Looks quiet. But then, it's always quiet for you, isn't it? You're the guy everyone walks all over in this town." "I get by," Ray said flatly. "Now, what can I do for you?" "My customers don't appreciate waiting." Vince glanced around the empty garage, then at Sam. "Customers, huh? Must be hiding them real good." He approached the Harley Ray had been working on, running a finger along the tank. "Nice bike. Yours, sweetheart? Touch my rig outside and find out how friendly I am," Sam replied evenly. The sneer-faced vulture let out a mock, "Ooh!" while the others chuckled. Vince's smile remained fixed, but his eyes hardened. "Feisty. I like that." He turned his attention back to Ray. "We were thinking of hanging around for a bit. You don't mind, do you, Ray Ray? Since business is so slow and all." It wasn't a question. Ray knew it. And so did Vince. The vultures had decided they were staying, and arguing would only make things worse. Ray had learned that lesson the hard way 3 months ago, when Vince had taken his refusal as an invitation to demonstrate just how persuasive he could be. The bruised ribs had taken weeks to heal. "Suit yourself," Ray said, picking up his wrench again. "Just keep clear of the work areas." Vince nodded to his gang, and they spread out through the garage. The tattooed one immediately began fiddling with a radio on the shelf, cranking up some heavy metal until it distorted through the cheap speakers. The bearded vultures examined tools on the wall, occasionally making comments about their quality. The sneering one positioned himself near the door, as if on lookout. "Mind if I take a closer look at what you're working on?" Vince asked, already moving toward the Harley. "Always curious about how other mechanics do things. Though I've heard some mixed reviews about your work, Ray Ray." Ray's jaw tightened, but he stepped aside. "Be my guest." Sam caught Ray's eye, giving him a small, reassuring nod. Her hand still held her phone, thumb hovering over the screen. The message was clear. She was ready if things went south. The problem was, they both knew things were already headed that way. The distant sound of tires on gravel announced another arrival. Through the open garage door, they could see a dusty pickup pulling in. Ray felt his stomach knot. Harvey Donnell, one of his regulars, was dropping off his bike for service. The timing couldn't have been worse. "Popular place all of a sudden," Vince observed with a predatory smile. "Looks like we came at just the right time to see Ray Ray in action." As Harvey stepped out of his truck, the vultures exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. The sneering one by the door straightened up slightly, and the 2 bearded ones moved to position themselves more centrally in the garage. Vince remained by the Harley, his hand now resting possessively on its handlebars. Ray took a deep breath and headed toward the door to greet Harvey, trying to ignore the sense of foreboding that settled over him. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly outside. But the real heat was just beginning to build inside Carter's garage. Harvey Donnell's smile faltered as he stepped into the garage and registered the vulture's presence. His eyes darted from them to Ray, uncertainty clear on his weathered face. "Hey, Ray," he said cautiously. "Still good to drop off the Indian for that valve adjustment?" Before Ray could answer, Vince stepped forward, hand extended in mock friendliness. "Harvey, right? Heard about your bike. Sweet ride." His voice carried artificial warmth that didn't reach his eyes. "Ray here was just telling us how backed up he is with work. Ain't that right, Ray?" "Ray? Ray?" Ray's face tightened. "I can take a look at it now, Harvey. Won't take long." Harvey glanced between them, sensing the tension. "I can come back another time. If." "Nonsense." Vince clapped a heavy hand on Harvey's shoulder. "Ray's the best mechanic in 3 counties. According to him. I'm sure he can squeeze you in. We're just hanging out, making sure our buddy Ray here isn't getting lonely." The tattooed vulture snickered, turning up the music another notch. The heavy bass throbbed through the small garage, making conversation more difficult. Sam stepped forward. "Harvey, good to see you. Ray was just finishing up the Stevenson bike, then he's all yours." Vince's smile twitched slightly at Sam's intervention. "And who might you be again? Ray's secretary?" "Sam Brooks," she replied coolly. "Long-haul trucker and friend." "And you boys are?" "The Iron Vultures," Vince said, drawing himself up taller. "But most folks around here already know that." "Can't say the name rings a bell," Sam replied, taking a casual sip of her coffee. The sneering vulture stepped closer. "We run these roads, lady." "Funny," Sam said. "I drive these roads for a living, and I've never needed permission." Tension crackled in the air. Harvey shuffled uncomfortably, clearly wishing he'd chosen a different day to bring in his bike. Vince's attention shifted suddenly. He moved to Ray's workbench and picked up a precision torque wrench, testing its weight in his hand. "Nice tools, Ray. Your daddy's, right?" The old man was a real mechanic from what I hear. Ray's eyes tracked the expensive tool in Vince's careless grip. "My father taught me everything I know. Except how to stand up for yourself, apparently," Vince replied, setting the wrench down with deliberate carelessness, so it teetered on the edge of the bench. It clattered to the floor, narrowly missing Ray's foot. "Oops," Vince said with a smirk. "Butterfingers." Ray bent to retrieve the torque wrench, examining it for damage. The calibration was sensitive, and a drop could throw it off. As he straightened, Vince's boot casually kicked over a tray of socket wrenches that had been organized by size. They scattered across the concrete floor with a cacophony of metallic clangs. "Man, you really should organize your shop better," Vince said, not bothering to hide his enjoyment. The bearded vultures laughed on cue, while the tattooed one began fingering expensive parts on a nearby shelf. Harvey took a step back toward the door, clearly deciding his bike could wait. Sam set down her coffee mug with a deliberate thunk. "Seems to me," she said clearly, "that guests ought to respect other people's property." Vince's gaze hardened as it swung toward her. "And it seems to me that truck drivers ought to mind their own business." "This is my business," Sam replied. "Ray's a friend, and I don't like watching friends get pushed around." Ray started gathering the scattered tools, trying to defuse the situation. "It's fine, Sam. No harm done." "No harm?" Vince's voice took on a theatrical tone. Ray, your lady friend thinks I'm causing harm." He turned to his gang. "Boys, are we causing harm?" The vultures shook their heads, chuckling darkly. "We're just having fun," the tattooed one said, deliberately knocking a can of degreaser off the shelf. The lid popped off when it hit the ground, sending a puddle of chemicals spreading across the floor. Ray's patience visibly frayed. "That's enough. I've got work to do." Vince stepped closer, invading Ray's personal space. What are you gonna do about it, Ray? Call the cops? Deputy Mendoza's too busy chasing speeders on the highway. He leaned in, dropping his voice to a mock whisper. Or maybe you'll finally grow a spine. Harvey cleared his throat from the doorway. I'll, come back tomorrow, Ray. Smart man? Vince called without looking away from Ray. Run along now. Once Harvey had retreated, Vince stepped back and gestured grandly around the garage. You know, boys, I'm thinking Ray here could use some help reorganizing his shop. It's a mess. The sneering vulture immediately shoved a row of parts off a nearby shelf, sending them crashing to the floor. The bearded ones moved to Ray's tool chest and began pulling out drawers. Stop it! Ray's voice finally rose, his hands clenching into fists. Vince's eyes lit up at the reaction. There it is. Finally got a rise out of you. He strutted closer to Ray. What are you gonna do, Ray? Ray? Fight all of us? Sam stepped between them. Phone now raised and obviously recording. That's enough. Get out before I call the state troopers. The tattooed vulture lunged forward and snatched at her phone, but Sam was quicker, pulling it back. Touch me. And assault charges get added to the property damage you're already on video committing. Vince's face darkened. Give me the phone, sweetheart. Not happening, Sam replied, backing up toward the office area. The sneering vulture moved to cut off her retreat, while the bearded ones closed in from the sides. Vince's focus remained on Ray. Your lady friend's got more fight than you do, he taunted. Maybe she should be running this place instead of a coward who hides behind a wrench. Ray stepped forward, face flushed with anger. I said that's enough. Vince's grin widened. Or what? He deliberately placed his hand on the Harley Ray had been working on and shoved. The motorcycle wobbled on its stand, then crashed onto its side with a sickening crunch of metal and breaking glass as the mirror and turn signal shattered on impact. Oops, Vince said, smile never wavering. Guess you'll have to fix that too. Something snapped in Ray. He lunged forward, shoving Vince back with both hands. Vince barely moved, solid as a brick wall, but his eyes flashed with dangerous delight. There it is, he crowed. Ray's finally showing some teeth. The vultures closed in, forming a loose circle around Ray. Sam was still backed against the office door, phone raised, recording everything. Put the phone down. The sneering vulture growled at her. Last warning. Not happening, Sam replied, though her voice betrayed a slight tremor now. Ray looked around, suddenly aware of how outnumbered they were. The garage, his sanctuary, had transformed into a trap. Vince stepped closer, invading Ray's space again. You pushed me, Ray. Ray, he said, voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Nobody pushes me. He shoved Ray backward with deliberate force. Ray stumbled, nearly falling, catching himself against the workbench. Tools clattered to the floor around him. You're nothing but a punching bag with a wrench, Vince continued, advancing. Everyone in town knows it. They laugh about it. Poor Ray. Can't even stand up for himself. Ray straightened, genuine anger flashing in his normally calm eyes. Get out of my shop. Make me, Vince challenged, shoving Ray again, harder this time. Ray crashed back against the shelving unit, pain flaring across his shoulder blades. Parts and tools rained down around him. One of the bearded vultures laughed and mimicked Ray's fall, earning chuckles from his companions. Sam stepped forward. I've got all of this recorded. The state troopers will. The tattooed vulture lunged for her phone again, and this time Sam had to duck away to avoid him. She backed toward the garage's side door, clearly calculating her escape route. Vince's attention remained locked on Ray, who was pulling himself upright, jaw clenched in pain and humiliation. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. See that? Vince called to his gang. Ray! Ray's gonna try again. Come on, buddy. Show us what you've got. Ray stood his ground, fists clenched but hesitating. He was no fighter. Vince knew it. Everyone knew it. That's what I thought. Vince sneered, moving in for another shove. At that moment, the garage's main door creaked. All eyes turned toward the sound. The silhouette of a man appeared in the entrance, backlit by the bright afternoon sun. Average height, solid build, wearing a simple button-up shirt and jeans. Nothing remarkable about him at first glance, except for the absolute stillness with which he stood, observing the scene before him. As he stepped fully into the garage, the light no longer obscuring his features, a ripple of recognition passed through the room. The man's face was instantly familiar to anyone who'd watched action, movies, or martial arts competitions over the past decades. Chuck Norris closed the door behind him with quiet deliberation, his eyes taking in everything: the scattered tools, the toppled motorcycle, Ray's disheveled appearance, Sam with her phone, and the 5 vultures frozen in surprise. No one spoke. The only sound was the heavy metal still blaring from the radio, suddenly incongruous in the silence that had fallen over the human drama. Chuck moved unhurriedly to the radio and switched it off. The silence that followed seemed to have physical weight. He turned, surveyed the scene once more, and then simply leaned against the workbench, arms loose at his sides. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His presence alone had shifted everything. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes but was likely only seconds. Chuck Norris stood perfectly still, his posture relaxed yet somehow commanding the entire space. His eyes sharp, assessing, unnervingly calm, moved from face to face, lingering briefly on Ray's disheveled appearance before settling on Vince. The biker leader recovered first, a cocky smile spreading across his face. "Well, well," he drawled, stretching out the words. "Look who it is, boys. We've got ourselves a celebrity." The vultures exchanged glances, some uncertain, others smirking as they followed their leader's cue. The tattooed one leaned toward the sneering one, whispering something that made them both chuckle nervously. "Chuck Norris," Vince continued, rolling the name around like he was tasting it. "Ain't you a little lost? Hollywood's about 1,000 miles that way." He gestured vaguely westward. Chuck remained silent, his expression unchanged. He simply watched, eyes never leaving Vince's face. There was something unnerving about his stillness, like a predator so confident it didn't need to posture. Ray straightened up, wincing slightly at the pain in his back where he'd hit the shelves. "Chuck," he acknowledged with a nod. "Bike running okay?" Chuck gave a single short nod. "Just needs an oil change, nothing urgent." His voice was quiet, measured, with the slight Texas drawl that millions recognized from his films. He spoke as if they were having a normal conversation, as if there wasn't a hostile biker gang standing between them. Vince's eyes narrowed slightly, thrown by the mundane exchange. "You two know each other?" "Chuck brings his Indian in every few months," Ray said, moving slowly to right a fallen stool. "Best maintained bike eye service." Sam caught Chuck's eye and gave him a slight nod of acknowledgement. He returned it almost imperceptibly, then shifted his attention back to Vince, who was beginning to look increasingly annoyed at being ignored. "So you're a motorcycle guy," Vince said, rolling his shoulders as if loosening up. "Wouldn't have pegged you for it. Figured you'd be driving some fancy sports car or something." Chuck didn't respond. He simply continued watching, his silence more eloquent than any words could have been. The tattooed vulture stepped forward, confidence bolstered by the continued presence of his gang. "We were just having a little discussion with Ray here about the quality of his work." He kicked at a fallen wrench, sending it skittering across the concrete floor. "Place is a mess, right?" "Looks to me like someone made a mess," Chuck observed quietly. Not the same thing. Something in his tone not threatening, not even particularly stern, just matter-of-fact made the tattooed vulture take a half-step back. Vince, noticing the subtle retreat, puffed up his chest. "We were just leaving anyway. Ray here isn't very hospitable to paying customers. Didn't see any money change hands," Chuck noted. "Just a lot of broken things." A flicker of irritation crossed Vince's face. "You saying I owe him something?" "For what?" "The mirror on that Harley, for starters," Sam interjected, her phone still recording. "I've got a nice clear shot of you pushing it over." Vince rounded on her, his facade of casual amusement slipping. "I thought I told you to put that away." "And I didn't," Sam replied, her voice steady despite the tension in her stance. The sneering vulture moved toward Sam, but froze when Chuck straightened up from the workbench. The motion was subtle. He didn't step forward, didn't raise his hands, didn't even change his expression, but something in that simple movement radiated such clear intent that the vulture stopped in his tracks. "Nobody's talking to you, movie star," Vince said, but his voice lacked some of its earlier confidence. "This is between us and Ray. Looks finished to me," Chuck replied, his voice still calm, almost conversational. "You broke some things. Now you can pay for them and leave. Or just leave. Your choice." A tense silence followed. The two bearded vultures glanced at each other, then at their leader, clearly uncertain about the escalating situation. The tattooed one's hand drifted to his pocket, where the outline of something, perhaps a knife, was visible against the denim. Chuck noticed the movement, but gave no indication of concern. His eyes remained fixed on Vince, watching and waiting. Vince's jaw worked as he considered his options. The dynamic had shifted dramatically with Chuck's arrival, and he knew it. What should have been an easy show of dominance over Ray had turned into something unpredictable. "You think I'm scared of you?" Vince finally said, taking a deliberate step toward Chuck. "Because of some movies? Some kicks you did with stuntmen and camera tricks?" Chuck didn't move, didn't blink. "I don't think about it at all." The simplicity of the response seemed to infuriate Vince more than any challenge could have. His face flushed slightly. "Boys," he said to his gang without taking his eyes off Chuck, "I think Mr. Hollywood here needs a reality check. Show him what real fighting looks like." There was a moment of hesitation. The vultures exchanged uncertain glances. The sneering one finally stepped forward, followed reluctantly by the others. They spread out slightly, forming a loose semicircle. Chuck remained where he was, his posture unchanged. Only his eyes moved, taking in each man's position with calm assessment. Ray moved to stand beside Chuck, his earlier fear replaced by a quiet resolve. "This is my shop," he said. "You want to fight, do it somewhere else." "Bit late to grow a spine, Ray," Vince sneered. "Should have done that before you let these animals tear up your garage." "I'm doing it now," Ray replied, his voice steadier than he felt. Sam edged along the wall, keeping her phone trained on the scene, making sure to capture every face clearly. "State troopers are 3 minutes out," she lied smoothly. "I sent them the video. Assault charges look real bad on a record, boys." The tattooed vulture hesitated, looking to Vince for direction. The bearded ones took half steps back, their enthusiasm for the confrontation clearly waning. Only the sneering one seemed eager to continue, bouncing slightly on the balls of his feet. Vince sensed his control of the situation slipping. His eyes darted from Chuck to Ray to Sam, then back to his increasingly uncertain gang. His options were narrowing rapidly. "We're not done here," he said finally, jabbing a finger at Ray. "Not by a long shot." He turned to Chuck. "And you?" He stopped, searching for words intimidating enough. "You picked the wrong town to play hero in." Chuck said nothing, his expression unchanged. The lack of response seemed to unnerve Vince more than any threat could have. "Let's roll, boys." Vince ordered, backing toward the door. Ray's shop is garbage anyway. Probably would have ruined our bikes. The vultures began moving toward the exit, maintaining aggressive postures but clearly relieved to be leaving. The sneering one was the last to turn, giving Chuck a final glare before following his comrades. Vince paused in the doorway. "This isn't over, Ray. Not even close. And you," he looked at Chuck, "you won't always be around to play bodyguard." With that, he stalked out into the sunlight. Moments later, the roar of motorcycles filled the air as the vultures fired up their bikes, revving the engines with unnecessary force before peeling out of the lot in a spray of gravel and dust. As the sound faded, Ray let out a long, slow breath. "Thanks," he said simply to Chuck. Chuck nodded once, then turned to survey the damage to the garage. "They've been bothering you long?" "Few months," Ray admitted, bending to retrieve a fallen tool. "Getting worse lately." Sam lowered her phone, stopping the recording. "They've been terrorizing half the county. Sheriff's department is stretched too thin to do much about it." Chuck nodded thoughtfully, moving to help Ray right the fallen Harley. Together, they lifted it back onto its stand. Chuck examined the broken mirror and dented fender with a mechanic's eye. "Not too bad," he assessed. "Cosmetic, mostly." "Yeah. But Stevenson's gonna be furious." Ray sighed, running a hand through his hair. He was hoping to get top dollar for it. Chuck studied Ray for a moment. "They'll be back," he said simply. It wasn't a question. Ray's shoulders slumped slightly. "Yeah. Vince doesn't let things go. Especially not when he's been shown up." "You stood your ground," Chuck observed. Ray gave a humorless laugh. "Fat lot of good it did. If you hadn't shown up when you did." "But he did," Sam interjected, placing a supportive hand on Ray's shoulder. "And we've got it all on video, enough to press charges if you want." Ray shook his head. "Charges won't stop them, might just make it worse." He looked at Chuck. "What brought you by today anyway? Your bike was fine last time you were here." A hint of a smile touched Chuck's lips. "Call it instinct." He didn't elaborate further. Outside, the sound of tires on gravel announced another arrival. Through the open door, they could see a sheriff's department SUV pulling up. Deputy Carl Mendoza stepped out, adjusting his hat against the sun. "Someone actually called the police?" Ray asked, surprised. Sam smiled, holding up her phone. "I wasn't completely bluffing about sending that video out." Deputy Mendoza entered the garage, taking in the scattered tools and general disarray with a frown. "Got a report of a disturbance," he said, then stopped short when he recognized Chuck. "Mr. Norris," he said, a hint of awe creeping into his professional tone. "Didn't expect to see you here." Chuck nodded in greeting but didn't comment. "The Iron Vultures decided to redecorate Ray's shop," Sam explained, showing Mendoza her phone. "I've got most of it on video." The deputy's frown deepened as he watched a few seconds of the recording. "They've been pushing boundaries all over the county. Had 3 complaints just last week." He looked at Ray. "You want to file a report? Press charges?" Ray hesitated, glancing at the damage around his shop. "Would it make any difference?" "Maybe not immediately," Mendoza admitted. "But enough complaints, enough evidence we build a case. Eventually, it adds up." Chuck had moved to the doorway, looking out at the now empty lot. The sun was beginning its late afternoon descent, casting longer shadows across the asphalt. He seemed to be considering something, his expression thoughtful. "They'll be at Dawson's bar by sundown," he said without turning around. "It's where they always end up. Creatures of habit." Ray and Mendoza exchanged glances. "How do you know that?" the deputy asked. Chuck turned back to face them. "Noticed their bikes there the last few times I've passed through, always the same time of day." "You've been watching them?" Sam asked, surprised. "I notice things," Chuck replied simply. It's a small town. Not many places for them to go. Mendoza nodded slowly. Dawson's is about their speed. No one else puts up with their nonsense for long. Chuck returned to where the Harley stood, examining the damage more closely. I can help you clean up, he offered to Ray. Thanks. But you didn't come here to pick up after those idiots, Ray said, already starting to gather scattered tools. I came for an oil change. Chuck reminded him with a slight smile. But it can wait. As they began to restore order to the garage, Deputy Mendoza took statements from Ray and Sam, documenting the damage with his department. Issued camera. The four worked in comfortable silence for a while, the tension of the earlier confrontation gradually dissipating. But underneath the calm productivity, Ray couldn't shake the feeling that this was merely an intermission, that Vince and his vultures would return, angrier than before. And when they did, Chuck Norris might not be around to defuse the situation with his mere presence. Unless, of course, he was. There had been something in Chuck's eyes when he mentioned Dawson's bar, a quiet determination that suggested he wasn't finished with the Iron Vultures just yet. Ray wasn't sure whether to feel hopeful or terrified about that possibility. Shadows lengthened across the garage floor as afternoon edged toward evening. Ray, Sam, Chuck, and Deputy Mendoza had restored some semblance of order to the shop, though the damage to the Harley remained a visible reminder of the Vulture's visit. That should do it, Ray said, placing the last of his precision tools back in their proper drawers. Thanks for the help, everyone. Mendoza nodded, flipping his notebook closed. I'll file the report, but don't get your hopes up for immediate action. Sheriff stretched thin with the county fair coming up this weekend. Understood, Ray replied, resignation evident in his voice. Chuck had been quiet throughout the cleanup, working methodically alongside the others. Now he glanced at the wall clock, then out at the darkening sky. Getting late, he observed. Sam followed his gaze. You heading somewhere? Thought I might stop by Dawson's, Chuck replied casually. Been a long day. Ray and Sam exchanged glances, both understanding the implication. Mendoza frowned. I wouldn't recommend that, Mr. Norris, the deputy said. The Vultures will be looking to save face after what happened here. Best not to provoke them further. Chuck's expression remained unreadable. Just getting a drink. Chuck, Ray said hesitantly. I appreciate what you did earlier, but Vince isn't the type to let things go. If you show up at Dawson's, it's a free country, Chuck replied mildly. And a public establishment, Mendoza sighed. I can't stop you, but I'd strongly advise against it. Those men are trouble even when they're not feeling cornered. Noted, Chuck said, offering no indication whether he was taking the advice or not. He turned to Ray. I'll be back tomorrow for that oil change, if that works for you. Sure. Ray nodded, still concerned. Shop opens at 8. Chuck nodded once, then headed for the door. Before he could exit, Sam stepped forward. Wait, she said. If you're going to Dawson's, I'm coming with you. Mendoza and Ray both started to protest simultaneously. Sam, that's not a good idea, Ray cautioned. Ma'am, I strongly advise against it, Mendoza added. Sam held up a hand to silence them. Someone needs to document whatever happens. Besides, she patted her phone, I've got the sheriff's office on speed dial. Chuck studied her for a moment, then gave a slight nod. Your choice. Ray ran a hand through his hair, clearly conflicted. Then I'm coming too. Ray, Sam began. It's my fight, Ray insisted. Has been all along. I can't hide in my garage while other people stand up for me. Chuck's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. Garage will be here tomorrow. Pride's harder to repair than motorcycles. The simple observation hung in the air. Ray straightened his shoulders, a new resolve evident in his stance. Mendoza looked between the three of them and sighed heavily. I'm off duty in 20 minutes. I'll swing by Dawson's for a routine check. He fixed Chuck with a pointed look. But I can't be everywhere at once, understand? Chuck nodded once, acknowledging the implicit message. The deputy would provide what cover he could, but they were largely on their own. Let's go, Chuck said simply, heading out to his truck. Dawson's bar squatted at the edge of town, a low cinder-block building with neon beer signs flickering in its small windows. The gravel parking lot was half filled with pickup trucks, cars in various states of repair, and prominently positioned near the entrance 5 motorcycles arranged in a neat row. The Iron Vulture's chrome gleamed under the single security light. Chuck pulled his truck into a space facing the exit, a tactical choice that didn't go unnoticed by Sam in the passenger seat. Ray parked his battered Ford alongside. Last chance to reconsider, Sam said, though her tone suggested she'd already committed to their course of action. They'll just come back to the garage eventually, Ray replied, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Might as well face them on neutral ground. Chuck said nothing, simply exiting his truck and waiting for the others to join him. His calm was unnerving and reassuring in equal measure, still center in the storm they were about to enter. The sounds of classic rock and boisterous conversation spilled out when they pulled open the door. Dawson's interior matched its exterior, unpretentious, well-worn, and dimly lit. A horseshoe-shaped bar dominated the center, surrounded by scattered tables and a pool area in the back. A small space had been cleared for dancing, though no one was using it. Conversations faltered as they entered, patrons turning to assess the newcomers. Recognition flickered across several faces, first of Ray, then of Chuck. Whispers rippled through the room. The Iron Vultures weren't hard to spot. They'd claimed the pool area as their territory, with Vince lining up a shot while his companions lounged against the walls, beers in hand. They hadn't noticed the new arrivals yet, focused on their game and their posturing. Chuck calmly led the way to the bar, positioning himself where he could keep the pool area in his peripheral vision. Sam and Ray flanked him, both tense but determined. The bartender, a middle-aged woman with shrewd eyes and dyed red hair, approached them. "What'll it be?" she asked, then did a double-take when she recognized Chuck. To her credit, she recovered quickly. "We don't get many celebrities in here. Just passing through," Chuck replied. "Water, please." "Beer," Sam said. "Whatever's cold." "Same," Ray added. As the bartender moved away to fill their orders, a fresh wave of whispers circulated through the bar. Several patrons shifted to get a better view, sensing the potential for drama. It didn't take long. One of the bearded vultures glanced up, nudged his companion, and then they both stared openly. The tattooed one followed their gaze, his pool cue freezing mid-stroke. Finally, he leaned over and muttered something to Vince. The biker leader straightened slowly, turning to confirm what his gang had already seen. His face darkened, jaw clenching visibly even from across the room. Well, Vince's voice carried clearly over the music. "Look who decided to join the party." The bartender returned with their drinks, shooting a concerned glance toward the pool area. "You folks might want to find somewhere else to be tonight," she said quietly. "Those boys have been drinking since 4. "Thanks for the warning," Sam replied, taking a deliberate sip of her beer. Chuck merely nodded his thanks, sipping his water without taking his eyes off the approaching bikers. Ray's hand trembled slightly as he lifted his glass, but his expression remained resolute. Vince sauntered over, his gang falling in behind him like a practiced formation. The other patrons subtly shifted away, clearing a space around the impending confrontation. "Twice, in one day," Vince drawled, stopping a few feet from their position at the bar. "I'm starting to think you're following me, Hollywood." Chuck took another calm sip of water. "Just getting a drink." "In my bar?" Vince's smile didn't reach his eyes. Don't see your name on the deed, Sam interjected. Vince's gaze flicked to her. Then back to Chuck. Your girlfriend's got a mouth on her. Friend, Chuck corrected mildly. And she's right. The tattooed vulture stepped forward. Pool cue. Still in hand. This is our place, man. Everyone here knows it. Several patrons looked away, confirming through their avoidance that the vultures had indeed staked their claim on Dawson's public establishment, Chuck observed, setting his glass down with deliberate care. Room for everyone. Vince's smile tightened. See? That's where you're wrong. Some places have membership requirements. He looked pointedly at Ray. Like having a spine. Ray set his beer down and turned to face Vince fully. I'm here, aren't I? Yeah, hiding behind your celebrity bodyguard. Vince scoffed. Real brave, Ray. Not hiding, Ray replied, his voice steadier than it had been at the garage. And not leaving. Something dangerous flashed in Vince's eyes. He took a step closer, invading Ray's personal space. You don't get it, do you? This isn't about you standing your ground for one night. This is about everyone knowing their place. He gestured around the bar. Ask anyone here who runs things in this county. No one spoke up. The silence was damning. Chuck finished his water and set the glass down with a soft clink that somehow commanded attention despite its quietness. Respect is earned, he said simply. Not taken. Vince's head snapped toward him. What would you know about earning respect, movie star? You've got a stunt double to do the hard parts. A few of the vultures chuckled. But there was an undercurrent of nervousness to it. They were playing to the crowd, but uncertainty had crept in. Chuck remained unruffled. Think what you want. The dismissive calm in his voice seemed to infuriate Vince more than any direct challenge could have. The biker leader's face flushed, his carefully constructed cool facade cracking. You think I'm scared of you? Vince demanded, voice rising. Because you did some fancy kicks in movies 30 years ago? I don't think about you at all, Chuck replied. The same response he'd given at the garage. A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the bar. Someone at the back let out a low, "Ooh." Vince's eyes narrowed to slits. The sneering vulture stepped closer, as if ready to back his leader's play. But the bearded ones held back slightly, their earlier confidence visibly wavering. Let me educate you, Vince said, jabbing a finger toward Chuck's chest without quite touching him. Out here in the real world, there are no cameras, no directors yelling cut, no second takes. Just men who know how to handle themselves and pretenders who don't. Throughout the tirade, Chuck's expression never changed. He simply watched, patient and still, as Vince worked himself into a greater rage with each word. You think you're tough? Vince finally demanded, voice nearly a shout now. Prove it! Right here! Right now! The bar had gone completely silent. Even the jukebox seemed to have paused between songs, as if the machine itself was holding its breath. Don't need to prove anything, Chuck replied, his voice level. That's what I thought. Vince sneered, turning to play to his audience. All talk, just like in the movies. Chuck didn't rise to the bait. He simply stood, relaxed, yet somehow commanding the space around him through sheer presence. Vince, frustrated by the lack of reaction, turned his attention back to Ray. Your friend's smarter than you, Ray. Knows when to back down. He took a menacing step forward. Maybe you should learn from him. Ray held his ground, though a muscle jumped in his jaw. I'm not backing down, Vince. Not anymore. The sneering vulture laughed. Listen to him. One afternoon with Chuck Norris and suddenly Ray thinks he's a tough guy. Sam had been quietly filming the exchange on her phone. Now the tattooed vulture noticed and lunged toward her. Give me that. Chuck's hand shot out, catching the biker's wrist in midair. He didn't squeeze or twist, just held it immobile with seemingly no effort. The tattooed vulture froze, eyes widening in surprise. "Don't," Chuck said quietly. The single word carried such authority that the biker actually stepped back when Chuck released him. He rubbed his wrist, looking shaken. Vince's face darkened further. "That's assault, Hollywood. Touching my friend like that." "Self-defense," Sam corrected, still recording. "After he tried to grab my property. All on video." Vince's eyes darted to the phone, then back to Chuck. His options were narrowing, and with them, his control of the situation, the very thing he valued above all else. "Outside," he said abruptly. "You and me, Hollywood. Let's settle this like men." Chuck regarded him steadily. "Nothing to settle." "Scared?" Vince taunted. "No," Chuck replied simply. The straightforward answer seemed to throw Vince momentarily. He'd expected denial, maybe even anger, not calm acknowledgement. "Then step outside," Vince pressed. "Unless you're all talk." "I'm comfortable here," Chuck said, his tone conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. The bartender had been watching nervously. Now she spoke up. "Take it outside if you're gonna fight. I don't need the sheriff shutting me down for brawls." Vince grinned, triumphantly. "You heard the lady, Hollywood. Outside. Unless you're afraid to show everyone what you're really made of." Throughout the exchange, Chuck's expression had remained unchanged, neither angry nor afraid, simply watchful and contained. Now he studied Vince for a long moment, as if making a final assessment. "After you," he said finally, gesturing toward the door. A murmur ran through the bar. Patrons exchanged glances, some looking concerned, others excited by the prospect of witnessing a confrontation between the notorious biker leader and the martial arts legend. Vince's gang straightened, puffing out their chests with renewed confidence. The sneering ones smirked at Ray. "Your friend's gonna regret this." "I don't think so," Ray replied, his faith in Chuck evident despite his nerves. Vince led the way outside, strutting through the door with exaggerated swagger. His gang followed, with Chuck, Ray, and Sam bringing up the rear. The other patrons trailed after them, forming a loose semicircle in the parking lot. The security light cast harsh shadows across the gravel, turning the mundane lot into a makeshift arena. Vince rolled his shoulders and neck, making a show of loosening up. He'd positioned himself with his back to his motorcycle, as if drawing strength from its proximity. "No rules," he announced loudly. "No referee. Just you and me, Hollywood." Chuck stood perfectly still, making no preparations whatsoever. He simply watched, hands relaxed at his sides, expression neutral. "Anytime you're ready," he said quietly. Vince circled slowly, like a predator sizing up prey. "Getting nervous? Starting to realize this isn't a movie set?" Chuck remained silent, turning slightly to keep Vince in view but otherwise not moving. The crowd had grown, with more bar patrons stepping outside to witness the confrontation. Someone had propped the door open, and the jukebox music spilled out into the night, an incongruous soundtrack to the tension building in the parking lot. "Last chance to walk away, old man," Vince taunted, still circling. "Admit you're just a washed-up actor who got lucky with a few movies." Chuck's silence seemed to infuriate Vince more than any retort could have. The biker's face contorted with frustration. "Say something," he demanded. "When I have something to say," Chuck replied calmly. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the onlookers. Vince's face darkened further. His patience, never his strong suit, had reached its limit. With a wordless snarl, he lunged forward, throwing a wild haymaker aimed at Chuck's head. The punch whistled through empty air as Chuck shifted, not dramatically, just a minimal movement that left Vince off balance and confused. Vince recovered quickly, spinning around with another wild swing. Again, Chuck wasn't where the punch landed. He hadn't countered, hadn't struck back, just simply wasn't where Vince expected him to be. Fight back. Vince growled, launching a combination of punches that grew increasingly desperate as each one failed to connect. Chuck moved like water fluid, efficient, always just beyond reach. He wasn't showboating or performing. His movements were economical, precise, just enough to avoid each attack without wasted energy. The crowd had fallen silent, watching in fascination as Vince grew more frustrated with each failed attempt. The biker's breathing became ragged, his movements less controlled, his face flushed with exertion and anger. "Stand still and fight," he panted, punctuating each word with another unsuccessful blow. Chuck finally spoke, his voice unchanged despite the physical activity. "This is fighting. You're just not seeing it." The simple observation seemed to push Vince over the edge. With a roar of frustration, he charged forward recklessly, arms outstretched to grapple. For the first time, Chuck moved decisively. A slight pivot, a precise redirection of Vince's momentum, and suddenly the biker leader was stumbling past him, crashing into the side of his own motorcycle. The bike toppled, and Vince went down with it in an ungraceful heap of man and machine. A collective gasp went up from the crowd. The Iron Vultures took half steps forward but hesitated, uncertain whether to intervene. Vince scrambled to his feet, face contorted with rage. His prized motorcycle lay on its side. Mirror broken. Paint scratched against the gravilla. Perfect mirror to what he'd done to the Harley in Ray's garage. "You're dead," he snarled, pulling a switchblade from his pocket. The blade snapped open with a metallic click that seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Several onlookers backed away. Sam's phone remained steady, recording everything. Ray tensed, clearly worried that the situation had escalated beyond a simple fistfight. Chuck's expression didn't change. He simply adjusted his stance slightly, hands still relaxed at his sides. "Put it away," he said quietly. "Before you make this worse. I'm gonna carve you up, old man," Vince threatened, advancing slowly now, knife extended before him. "Show everyone what a fraud you really are." Chuck remained still, watching, waiting. The tension in the parking lot was palpable, everyone holding their breath as Vince closed the distance. When the biker lunged with the knife, Chuck's movement was so fast it seemed like a blur to most observers. One moment Vince was attacking, the next he was on his knees, arm twisted behind him at a painful angle. Knife on the ground, several feet away. Chuck held him there with what appeared to be minimal effort. One hand controlling Vince's twisted arm, the other resting lightly on his shoulder for balance. "It's over," Chuck said, voice still calm, not even slightly elevated from the exertion. Vince struggled briefly, then let out a pained gasp as the movement caused his arm to twist further. "Get off me," he demanded. But the authority had drained from his voice, replaced by something close to panic. The Iron Vultures stood frozen, watching their leader subdued with such apparent ease. The sneering one took a hesitant step forward, but a sharp look from Chuck stopped him in his tracks. "Stay there," Chuck advised. It wasn't a threat, just a calm suggestion that somehow carried the weight of absolute certainty. The sound of tires on gravel drew everyone's attention. Deputy Mendoza's cruiser pulled into the lot, light bar flashing but siren silent. He stepped out, taking in the scene with a practiced eye. "Perfect timing," Sam called, still filming. "We've got assault with a deadly weapon on video." Mendoza approached cautiously, hand resting on his holster but weapon not drawn. "Everyone stay calm," he ordered. Though the command seemed unnecessary apart from Vince, everyone was perfectly still. Chuck met the deputy's eyes and nodded once. At Mendoza's reciprocal nod, Chuck released Vince, stepping back smoothly to give the officer space to work. Vince stumbled to his feet, rubbing his shoulder and glaring murderously at Chuck. "He attacked me," he claimed immediately. "Everyone saw it." That's not what the video shows, Sam countered, holding up her phone. You pulled a knife on him. He defended himself. Mendoza looked between them, then at the knife still lying on the gravel. Anyone care to explain what happened here? Before Vince could speak, the bartender stepped forward from the crowd. The biker challenged him, she said, pointing at Chuck. Insisted they come outside to fight. Then pulled a knife when he was losing. Several other patrons nodded in confirmation. The Iron Vultures shifted uncomfortably, seeing the situation rapidly deteriorating for their leader. Mendoza sighed heavily. Mr. Mercer, turn around and put your hands behind your back. For what? For what? Vince demanded, though there was a note of desperation creeping into his voice. Disturbing the peace, for starters, Mendoza replied. Assault with a deadly weapon, if Mr. Norris wants to press charges. All eyes turned to Chuck, who stood quietly observing the scene. After a moment's consideration, he spoke. I'll leave that to Ray, he said, surprising everyone. It's his shop you damaged. His town you've been terrorizing. His decision. Ray blinked, caught off guard by suddenly being the center of attention. He looked at Vincetha, man who had humiliated him, threatened him, destroyed his property, and saw something he'd never noticed before. Insecurity barely masked by bravado. Arrest him for the knife, Ray said finally. But the rest? He paused, considering. The rest we can settle with repairs to my shop, and the Harley. And an agreement to leave my customers alone from now on. Vince stared at Ray in disbelief. You think this changes anything? You think I'm going to? You will, Chuck interrupted quietly. Because the alternative is jail, and your reputation won't survive that. The simple truth hung in the air. Vince's entire identity was built on being perceived as untouchable, as the man who made the rules rather than followed them. A stint in county lockup would shatter that image irreparably. Mendoza looked between them, then nodded slowly. Assault charge stands. But we can work something out for the rest, if Ray's agreeable. He fixed Vince with a stern look. And if Mr. Mercer understands that his activities in this county are going to be under much closer scrutiny from now on. Vince's jaw worked as he processed his limited options. Finally, with a curt nod, he extended his wrists for the handcuffs. Mendoza secured them efficiently, then led him toward the cruiser. What about us? The tattooed vulture asked nervously, gesturing to himself and the others. Go home, Mendoza advised, and think hard about whether following Vince's lead is working out for you. The vultures exchanged uncertain glances, their unified front crumbling without their leader's dominant presence. After a moment's hesitation, they began drifting toward their motorcycles, all except the one Vince had knocked over, which would need attention before it could be ridden. As Mendoza placed Vince in the back of his cruiser, the biker leader twisted to look back at Chuck, Ray, and Sam. His expression was a complex mixture of humiliation, anger, and something that might have been the first glimmer of reluctant respect. The cruiser pulled away, leaving an odd, anticlimactic silence in its wake. The bar patrons began to disperse, returning inside with excited murmurs, already recounting details of what they'd witnessed to those who hadn't had a clear view. Ray turned to Chuck, extending his hand. Thank you, he said simply. Chuck shook it with a firm grip and a slight nod. You stood your ground when it mattered. After you showed me how, Ray admitted. No, Chuck corrected gently. You always knew how. Just needed to remember. Sam lowered her phone finally, stopping the recording. So what happens now? Think the vultures will keep their distance? Chuck glanced toward the remaining bikers, who were struggling to right Vince's motorcycle without drawing attention to themselves. Depends on who steps up to lead them, he observed. Power vacuums tend to get filled, but not always by the same kind of power, Ray said thoughtfully, watching the vultures' disorganized efforts. The three stood in companionable silence for a moment, the tension of the confrontation gradually dissipating in the cool night air. The sounds of the bar music, laughter, clinking glasses provided a mundane backdrop to the extraordinary events that had just transpired. "Drink?" Sam suggested, nodding toward Dawson's entrance. Ray smiled, a genuine expression that erased years of worry from his face. "I could use one after that." They both looked at Chuck, who gazed thoughtfully at the stars, now visible in the clear night sky. After a moment, he nodded. "One," he agreed. "Then I've got a bike that needs an oil change in the morning." Together, they walked back into Dawson's, where the atmosphere had already transformed. Patrons greeted Ray with newfound respect, offering handshakes and backslaps. A few approached Chuck for autographs, which he provided with quiet grace. Sam showed her video to an appreciative audience at the bar, who marveled at Chuck's economy of movement and Ray's unexpected stand. For the first time in months, Ray Carter felt at home in his own town, and as he watched Chuck fielding questions with patient modesty, he understood that true strength wasn't about making noise or demanding respect. It was about knowing your worth and standing firm in that knowledge, come what may. Dawn broke over Carter's garage, painting the dusty lot in hues of gold. Ray had arrived early, a new energy in his step as he prepared for the day. The events at Dawson's still seemed surreal. Vince in handcuffs, the respect in the patrons' eyes when they looked at him. He just brewed coffee when the sound of an approaching motorcycle caught his attention. Through the open garage door, he watched Chuck Norris pull in, his vintage Indian gleaming in the morning light. There was something fitting about Chuck's choice of bike, classic and powerful, without the ostentatious chrome the vultures favored. "Morning," Ray greeted, extending a mug of fresh coffee. "Right on time." "Traffic was light," Chuck replied with the hint of a smile, accepting the coffee. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sunrise cast long shadows across the lot. "Word travels fast in small towns," Ray said. "Phone's been ringing since I got in. Everyone wants to hear about last night firsthand." Chuck nodded, unsurprised. Aftermath's always louder than the event. Before Ray could respond, the rumble of motorcycles reached them. 4 bikes pulled into the lot, the remaining Iron Vultures. They parked in a neat line and cut their engines, the sudden silence heavy with tension. The tattooed vulture led them, his swagger noticeably subdued. "Morning," he called, stopping a respectful distance away. "Shop open?" Ray nodded cautiously. "Just opened. What can I do for you?" The bikers exchanged glances before the tattooed one spoke again. "Vince's bike got damaged last night. Needs fixing before he gets out." He gestured to where they'd left a 5th motorcycle at the edge of the lot, Vince's prized ride, its chrome scratched and mirror broken from the fall. "And you're bringing it to me? After everything that happened?" The tattooed vulture shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "You're the best mechanic around. Everyone knows it." He paused, then added reluctantly, "Including Vince." The admission hung in the air, both an apology and a peace offering. Ray glanced at Chuck, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "I'll take a look," Ray decided. "But I've got other customers ahead of him, and I expect payment up front." "Fair enough," the tattooed one agreed, reaching for his wallet. As Ray named a figure and the transaction proceeded, the atmosphere shifted from tense to merely businesslike. The bearded vultures wheeled Vince's bike into the garage, while the sneering one hung back, studying Chuck with reluctant respect. "That was some move last night," he finally said to Chuck. "The way you took Vince down, never seen anything like it." Chuck nodded once in acknowledgement but offered no commentary. "You could have really hurt him," the biker continued. "But you didn't." "Wasn't necessary," Chuck replied simply. The sneering vulture processed this, his expression thoughtful. "Vince isn't going to let this go easy. He's got a hard head." "His choice," Chuck said with a slight shrug. "Always is." Inside the garage, Ray was inspecting Vince's motorcycle. "Should be ready by this afternoon," he informed the tattooed vulture. We'll be back around 4 then? Make it 5, Ray countered, asserting control of his own schedule. I've got Chuck's oil change first, then Harvey Donnell's Indian. The tattooed one paused before leaving. One more thing, he said, voice lowered. You should know. Vince holds grudges. Last night was, well, it didn't go how he planned. I'm aware, Ray replied evenly. Your friend won't always be around. Don't need him to be, Ray said, and realized as he spoke that he meant it. But thanks for the warning. The vultures departed with considerably less noise than they'd arrived with, leaving Ray and Chuck alone. Ray moved to his workbench, organizing tools for the day ahead, while Chuck finished his coffee in thoughtful silence. Think they're right? Ray finally asked. About Vince not letting it go? Chuck set his empty mug down. Probably. Men like that, their identity is tied to how others see them. Hard to walk away from that. The morning progressed with comfortable routine. Ray changed the oil in Chuck's Indian, while they discussed the finer points of motorcycle maintenance. Customers came and went, many lingering longer than necessary, eager to catch a glimpse of the martial arts legend. By noon, Sam stopped by with sandwiches from the diner, regaling them with stories of how her video had spread through town. Everyone's talking about it, she reported. Ellie at the diner said they've had double the usual lunch crowd, all wanting to discuss what happened at Dawson's. They were interrupted by Deputy Mendoza's arrival. Just wanted to let you know Vince is out. Judge gave him community service along with the fines, and a warning to stay out of trouble. The deputy's expression suggested he didn't expect the warning to be heeded. I'll be patrolling past here more often for a while, he promised. And past your place too, Ms. Brooks. Thanks, Sam said. But I can handle myself. Mendoza smiled slightly. Never doubted it. Still, better safe than sorry. He turned to leave, then paused. By the way, Mr. Norris, my father was a huge fan. Used to watch your movies with me when I was a kid. Said you were the real deal. He extended his hand. Based on what I saw last night, he was right. Chuck shook the deputy's hand with a firm grip and a slight nod. He raised a good son. After Mendoza left, Ray returned to working on Vince's motorcycle, his movements precise despite the tension evident in his shoulders. Chuck worked alongside him, handing tools before Ray could ask for them, their silence comfortable and productive. Almost done, Ray said eventually, stepping back to inspect his work. Just need to replace that mirror and buff out these scratches. Chuck examined the motorcycle with a mechanic's eye. Clean work. As the afternoon wore on, Ray found himself reflecting on how much had changed in just 24 hours. The garage, which had felt like a trap yesterday when the vultures surrounded him, now felt like a sanctuary again, a place where he was in control, where his skill was valued. And it wasn't just Chuck's intervention that had made the difference. It was the moment Ray himself had finally stood his ground, first at the garage, and then at Dawson's. Chuck had shown him how to face intimidation with calm resolve rather than fear or aggression. The vultures would return. Ray had no illusions about that. Vince wasn't the type to let go of a grudge easily. But something fundamental had shifted, both in how Ray saw himself and in how others saw him. He caught Chuck watching him with quiet approval, as if reading his thoughts. They'll be back at 5, Ray said, setting down his polishing cloth. Think Vince will be with them? Maybe, Chuck replied. Question is, what will you do when they come? Ray straightened, a new confidence in his posture. Handle it, one way or another. Chuck nodded, satisfied. That's all anyone can do. And Ray knew it was enough. 3 weeks passed with surprising tranquility. Ray's business flourished, with customers from neighboring towns making the drive specifically to have their motorcycles serviced by the mechanic Chuck Norris trusted. The Iron Vultures maintained an uneasy distance, occasionally spotted riding through town but notably absent from their usual haunting grounds. On a warm Tuesday afternoon, Ray was finishing a valve adjustment when the rumble of approaching motorcycles reached his ears. He straightened as 5 bikes pulled into the lot, the Iron Vultures, led by Vince. "Ray," Vince called, dropping the mocking nickname he'd used for so long. "Got a minute?" Ray studied him carefully, noting subtle changes in the biker's demeanor. The swagger was still there, but tempered somehow. "Shop's open," he replied neutrally. Vince approached alone, stopping at a conversational distance. His eyes scanned the garage. "Your friend move on?" "Few weeks ago," Ray confirmed. "Just passing through." Vince nodded, seeming neither particularly relieved nor disappointed. "Bike's running good. Whatever you did to the clutch, it's smoother than before." "Just adjusted the tension," Ray explained. "Was set too tight." An awkward silence stretched between them, neither man quite sure how to navigate this new, less adversarial territory. "Look," Vince finally said, "I'm not here to cause trouble." Ray raised an eyebrow, skepticism evident. "That's new." A flicker of the old anger crossed Vince's face, quickly suppressed. "Yeah, well, things change." "So I've heard," Ray replied dryly. "What can I do for you?" Vince glanced back at his waiting gang, then returned his attention to Ray. "Got a proposition for you." "Business proposition." "I'm listening." "We're organizing a charity ride," Vince explained, "for the children's hospital in the city. Looking for sponsors. Partners." He shifted his weight uncomfortably. "Thought maybe you'd want to be the official mechanic. Have a booth at the starting point. Maybe ride along." Of all the scenarios Ray had imagined for Vince's return, this hadn't even made the list. "A charity ride," he repeated, making sure he'd heard correctly. "Yeah. Problem with that?" "No," Ray said quickly. "Just unexpected. Like I said, things change." Vince handed Ray a folded flyer. "Details are all there. 3 weeks from Saturday. Expecting about 100 bikes." Ray examined the professionally designed announcement for the Iron Vultures charity run. The hospital's logo was prominently featured, along with registration details. "Why me?" he asked. "Plenty of other mechanics around." Vince met his gaze directly. "Because you're the best. And because—" He paused, the admission clearly difficult. "Because respect is earned, like your friend said." "I'll think about it," Ray said finally. Vince nodded, accepting the non-commitment with surprising grace. "Fair enough. Let me know by next week if you're in." He turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. The guys and I were looking for a regular place to get our bikes serviced. Somewhere reliable." Ray couldn't help but laugh. "You're asking if you can be my customers? After everything?" "Business is business," Vince replied, deliberately echoing Ray's words from their last encounter. "Unless you've got a problem with that." Ray considered the offer. "No problem. As long as you respect my shop and pay your bills on time." "Done," Vince agreed, extending his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Ray shook it firmly. The handshake was brief but significant, not quite friendship, but a mutual recognition that had been entirely absent from their previous interactions. As Vince rejoined his waiting gang, Sam's truck pulled into the lot. She approached cautiously. "Everything okay?" she asked quietly. "Yeah," Ray replied, surprised to find he meant it. "Just a business proposition." "From Vince?" The skepticism in her voice was palpable. Ray handed her the flyer. "Charity ride. They want me to be the official mechanic." Sam's eyebrows shot up as she scanned the announcement. "Well, I'll be damned. The Iron Vulture's doing community service that isn't court-ordered." "People change," Ray said, echoing Chuck's words. "Some people," Sam amended, watching the bikers leave. Some people just find better ways to get what they want. Ray considered this. Maybe. But sometimes the better way is actually better for everyone. 3 weeks later, Ray stood beside his mobile repair stand at the starting point of the Iron Vultures charity run. Over 200 motorcycles filled the fairground parking lot, their riders mingling as they prepared for the journey. Vince moved through the crowd with surprising diplomacy, more comfortable in his role as organizer than Ray would have predicted. Deputy Mendoza was there too, not in an official capacity, but as a participant. He stopped by Ray's booth. "Quite a turnout," he observed. "Better than anyone expected." Ray agreed. "Hospital director said they've already raised more than last year's run." The deputy glanced toward where Vince was speaking with a reporter. "Still can't quite believe it." "Vince Mercer, community leader." Ray chuckled. "I wouldn't go that far. But he's found a different way to get the attention he craves." "Better way," Mendoza acknowledged. "For everyone." As they spoke, Sam approached, camera in hand. She'd been designated the official photographer for the event. "Almost time," she announced. "Vince wants everyone in position for the group photo." As the motorcycles lined up for departure, Ray found himself positioned near Vince at the head of the formation. "Good turnout," Ray commented. "Yeah," Vince agreed. "Better than expected." He hesitated, then added, "Couldn't have done it without your endorsement. People trust you around here." The admission clearly cost him something, but it was offered without resentment, another small step in the evolution that had begun that night at Dawson's. "Happy to help," Ray replied. "It's a good cause." Vince moved away to address the riders, and Ray noticed a solitary motorcycle pulling into the load of vintage Indian, its rider instantly recognizable despite the helmet. Chuck Norris parked at the edge of the gathering, removing his helmet and surveying the scene with quiet interest. Several participants noticed him, excitement rippling through the crowd. Ray made his way over, unable to contain his smile. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Was in the area," Chuck replied. "Heard about the event." "From who?" Ray asked, genuinely curious. A hint of a smile touched Chuck's lips. "I notice things." Vince approached, his stride hesitant but determined. "Didn't think you'd show up for this," he said. The challenge in his voice muted, but still present. Chuck regarded him steadily. "Good cause." Vince nodded, clearly struggling with mixed emotions. "We've got room for one more rider," he finally offered. "If you're interested." It was an olive branch of sorts, extended with difficulty but genuine nonetheless. Chuck considered it for a moment, then nodded once. "Might join for part of the route," he agreed. As the start time approached, everyone returned to their motorcycles. Chuck wheeled his Indian into position near the back, content to participate without fanfare. Ray found himself once again near the front with Vince. "Your friend's something else," Vince commented, adjusting his gloves. "Still not sure if I like him or not." Ray smiled. "I don't think it matters to him either way." Vince considered this, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's probably what makes him, him." He revved his engine. "Ready to ride, Ray?" "Ready," Ray confirmed, feeling the vibration of his own motorcycle beneath him. As the formation prepared to depart, Ray glanced back at where Chuck waited patiently, his presence a quiet reminder of how much had changed. The confrontation at Dawson's had been about more than just putting Vince in his place. It had been a demonstration of a different kind of strength, one built on discipline and restraint rather than intimidation. The signal was given, and 200 engines roared to life. As they pulled out onto the highway, Ray caught one last glimpse of Chuck, in his mirror still calm, still composed, a steady presence amid the noise and movement. Just as he had been that day in the garage, when he'd stepped through the door and changed everything without throwing a single punch. Because true strength, as they'd all learned, didn't need to announce itself. It simply was. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.